the disgraceful human zoo was a shameful but very common phenomenon in the world until the middle of the 20th century. And one of the first exotic residents to be exhibited in this way was Saarti Bartman of the Cape Colony. This is Flip Side of History, and today we will discuss Saarti or Saarti Bartman and her story. While a slave. Very little is known about her early life. The girl was either a slave in a well-to-do Boer farming family living in Cape Town, or a personally free but still in fact dependent servant. In any case, she was torn away from her tribe and relatives by being presumably captured during a raid by slave traders. The year of her birth is not known exactly. Some sources confidently point to 1789. But this is most likely a fraud designed to emphasize the contrast between the fate of the African woman and the ideals of the Great French Revolution, which began in that year. In reality, we can talk about the late 1780s and early 1790s, since it's more accurate. The name Saarti Bartman or Bartman was given to her by the whites, and Saarti is a diminutive and contemptuous form of it, which was used to address the girl by slave owners. It is also not entirely clear who and what relation a certain Hendrik or Peter Caesar was to the girl, who was directly involved in her transformation into an amusing spectacle for the European public. According to the most common version, he was a relative of Sarah's owners. On the other version, he was a free black man, a cohabitant of the girl herself. In Africa, white settlers rarely interfered in the private lives of slaves and colored servants, if only because the birth of children was beneficial to them. There is an assumption that Saarti was also married and gave birth to 2 children, but sadly, they died. Her fate was changed by an encounter with Dr. Dunlop. They were introduced by the same Hendrik Peter Caesar. The Englishman's attention was attracted by Sarah's very strange, from obviously European point of view, physique, and he decided that he could make money on it. Khoikhoi beauty standards. The fact is that Sarah was a Khoikhoi woman, and the women of this ethnic community do have quite noticeable differences from Europeans and even most Africans in body structure. From the European point of view, they are very unattractive. Saarti's skin was not black, but rather yellowish-brown, and her lips were greatly enlarged. From the surviving sketches from nature, it is known that she also had large nipples. But the main thing is that, like many within her ethnic group, she had severe steatopegia, that is, the deposition of fat on the thighs and buttocks. According to various reports, Sarah's hip circumference reached 2 meters. Her buttocks were protruding very much, even sticking up a little. The flanks and upper parts of the legs were also disproportionately full. The woman had another peculiarity about her: enlarged, drooping genitals. However, William Dunlop hardly saw this before he started his business on her unusual appearance. There is a version that during her lifetime, Sarah never showed to anyone this feature at all, known as the apron. In general, from the point of view of the Khoikhoi, Sarah was a truly attractive girl. But to a European, she seemed really strange, almost like a freak. Freak circuses were by that time quite popular, and Dunlop decided that he could make good money showing Bartman to the British public. Attraction under contract. In 1807, Britain banned the slave trade. Accordingly, Dunlop could not bring Sarah into the country by force. It is not known exactly what he promised her and how he depicted the future English life, but Bartman went with him more or less voluntarily, despite everything. It's obvious that the entrepreneur promised the girl the opportunity to earn decent money in an easy way. They even had a contract drawn up, which woman signed. Yet, there is no doubt that the girl did not really understand what she would do and, most importantly, how people around her would respond to it. And of course, she had no idea of the country she was going to. It is almost certain that she did not speak English at the time, although she spoke Afrikaans, the language of the Boers. In 1810, Dunlop brought Saarti to England and began displaying her as a rare animal. The girl was deliberately dressed up as a savage, although she was not, and shown for a certain fee to those who wished. She was often displayed in a cage, and in some cases for an additional fee, visitors had the opportunity to touch her or even poke her body with a cane or umbrella in particularly prominent places. And these kinds of entertainments were not fully banned once again until the middle of the 20th century. The African Association, an abolitionist organization, did not ignore these shows and demanded Sarah's release under the Abolition of Slavery Act. There was a trial, but it retained Dunlop's rights, because Dunlop produced the signed contract and thus proved that he was not acting as a slaveholder but as an entrepreneur. In 1811, she was issued a British passport in the name of Sarah Bartman. At the same time, she was baptized with this name, although there is a possibility that the baptism took place in South Africa. The woman did not see the promised money, ever. In fact, she was only clothed and fed, and the food often was low quality. The girl also suffered from the unusual climate. It's still unclear if she was shown completely naked, nearly nude, or wearing tight-fitting tights. In any case, it is known that she insisted on a minimum of clothing in the form of an apron traditional for many African peoples. Of course, she was forced to pose nude for artists who made sketches of her, and to show herself to doctors and scientists who wanted to study her body. And the box office soon fell, the audience, as it usually happens, got bored with the novelty, and in 1814 Dunlop sold Sarah to a certain Roux, a Frenchman who organized circus performances. He exhibited her in Holland and France and treated the girl much worse than the Englishman. This bastard kept her in chain and brought her to the stage in a collar together with wild animals. And in the spring of 1815, in Paris, Roux handed her over to scientists as an object for research. The famous Georges Cuvier was particularly interested in it, but the research did not yield any income, and as a spectacle, the woman was no longer interesting, and she was simply left to her fate. Unusual ideas about evolution. It should be remembered that the theory of evolution had not yet been developed at the beginning of the 19th century. But nonetheless, Bartman was shown to the public, among other things, as an example of a subhuman, a species intermediate between man and ape. Cuvier, on the other hand, investigated this case as an intermediate stage, a creature that is a transitional step between primates and a man. But it doesn't change the cruel and dehumanizing approach. For all the novelty of the very idea of the formation of man by transformation from primates, Cuvier's conclusions did not depart from the racism characteristic of his time. In her unusual buttocks, he saw a commonality with the structure of the body of mandrills and compared her ears to the ears of orangutans. He even considered the liveliness of herself as a whole to be ape-like. The so-called scientist believed that he had found the very intermediate link between humans and primates. At the same time, Cuvier was a conscientious enough researcher not to deny the presence of human qualities in that woman. He noted that she was quick-witted and trainable, spoke excellent Dutch, and could communicate in English and French, and had a good memory. And it's obvious, well, because she's a human. Although all of this did not make Sarah Bartman a fully developed human in the eyes of Parisians of the early 19th century. Abandoned by those who brought her here, she was forced into prostitution, began heavy drinking, and soon died on December 29, 1815, of an inflammatory disease. Attraction for people even after death. But even her tragic death did not bring Bartman peace either. Her body was dissected and then dismembered, and by the way, not to determine the cause of death, as it would be in other people, but simply for anatomical study. The same Cuvier was also involved in this. But that would be somewhat tolerable in case if it would be for the development of medicine and anatomy. Such procedures are sometimes necessary in certain individuals. But her alcoholized brain and genitals, as well as her skeleton, were then exhibited in the Musée de l'Homme, one of the branches of the Musée d'Histoire Naturelle in Paris, for all around the Europe to see, and they were used in lectures for medical students. And the cynicism continued until 1974. The skeleton was used for 2 years longer. Then they were put away in the storerooms. It was only in 1994, at the request of the newly elected president of South Africa himself, Nelson Mandela, that the French leadership agreed to send them home. In fact, it took several more years to carry out such a so-called complex case. Sarah Bartman returned to South Africa in 2002 and was buried near Hanky. During her lifetime in Europe, she was called the Khoikhoi Venus, as a form of mockery. In 2010, the film Black Venus was made about her tragic fate. Thank you for watching this educational episode. We hope you found out something new for yourself, and in case if you did, leave a like and subscribe to our channel. And now, we see you later.
После смерти, но и смерть не принесла Саарти покоя.